After studying this module, you shall be able to appreciate the need to study the trade theory, understand the ideas of mercantilism, distinguish between absolute and comparative advantage, understand the factor proportion theory of trade. The history of trade is as old as mankind. People have traded for thousands of years. It is evident from early civilization like that of Egypt, Mesopotamia, where people traded among themselves and with others. Then gradually, trade took place over land and sea. In the 15th century, Europeans explored sea route to trade in Asia. Later on, in 1700s, Industrial Revolution started in Britain, England. It is very evident that slowly and gradually the international trade has grown and is still on the verge of growing almost in every part of the world. At present, there are about 159 countries as members of WTO, which is the World Trade Organization, an international organization that sets up the rules for world trade with a view to promote free and fair trade globally. Let us understand what is meant by international trade and trade theory. International trade is a simple term which means sale, purchase or exchange of goods and services between people or entities. From the international perspective, trade would arise when sale, purchase or exchange of goods and services takes place across cross-national boundaries or borders. We need to understand why do nations engage in international trade. The main question in economics of trade is why nations trade. What needs to be clarified is as to why they trade. The availability of middlemen and transport can only facilitate trade, not cause it. Why, in the first place, do they do so? What is it that makes people who live far away speak different languages and operate under different legal and economic system that take trouble of exchanging goods and services? There are three views about why nations trade. The first one is the economic view. It says that there must be economic gains from trade from both the sides. The second one is the resource-based view. This view says that nations trade because some firm in one nation generate exports that are valuable, unique and hard to imitate. The third view is the institution-based view. It says that there are different rules that govern trade which determine how gains are shared among nations. Moving further, we shall discuss the trade theory. The answer to the question why nations engage in international trade is there is the trade theory. The trade theory starts with why different nations or countries trade and end by discussing the benefits to countries engaged in such trade. International trade theory helps in explaining the pattern of trade as well as the distribution of gains arising from such trade. It also helps in explaining the observed trade and deduces the effect of trade on the domestic economy. Thus, trade provide answer to questions like why do nations trade? What do they trade? And is trade a good thing? The most primitive system in trade theory is the mercantilism. The term mercantile system was coined by Adam Smith that describes a political economy in which nations encourage exports and restrain imports in order to increase financial wealth. The goal of mercantilism lies in achieving favorable balance of trade, which is also known as the BOT, that would bring in more gold, silver into the economy because possession of wealth, gold and silver considered as a sign of a strong nation. In short, increasing gold holding by augmenting exports and restricting imports laid the root of this theory. The mercantile system was dominated in the Western Europe, especially in Holland, France, UK, Belgium, Portugal and Spain from 16th to late 18th centuries. These nations adopted the policies of government intervention, colonization and trade surpluses to accomplish the goal of mercantilism. These three policies work together. At that time, the possession of wealth, gold and silver was considered as a sign of strong nation. The next theory is the absolute advantage theory and the comparative advantage theory. The absolute advantage theory. This theory was given by Adam Smith in the second half of 18th century as he strongly criticized the mercantilist assumption that trade is a zero-sum game and advanced free trade as it enlarges a country's wealth. Absolute advantage theory simply implies that a country should import goods that are cheaper abroad, that is, when the cost of importing goods from other country is less than the cost of producing it domestically, and export goods which it can produce more efficiently than other countries. It will become clearer with the help of an example. Suppose there are two countries, India and Bangladesh. Both countries are capable of producing radios and fans. The underlying assumption is that both use just one factor of production, that is labor. Both countries are endowed with 10 labor hours each that can be utilized to produce these two commodities. Here, India has an absolute advantage in the production of radios and Bangladesh in the production of fans because India can produce 30 units of radios and 20 units of fan with 10 labor hours available for each. On the other hand, Bangladesh can produce 10 units of radios and 50 units of fans. It is very clear from the example shown in the given figure depicting the production possibility frontiers and the tables that there is a gain from trade when India is producing radio and Bangladesh produces fans with the available entire resources because after trade the aggregate production of both the countries increased from 40 units to 60 units for radios and from 70 units to 100 units. So India should produce radio and export it to Bangladesh and import fans from there. On the other hand, Bangladesh should produce fans and export to India and import radios from there. This trade leads to complete specialization where India is specialized in the production of radios and Bangladesh in the production of fans. Absolute advantage theory thus explains only the presence of trade when two countries have an absolute advantage respectively in two different commodities. Ordinarily in the world at large, certain countries have more efficient production. Therefore, they are able to produce more with the given resources, which is 10 labor hours in the above example. It seems anomalous that under such circumstances, such economies still do trade with other economies which are capable of producing less for the same amount of labor input in the case of both commodities. We should now study another theory which would explain such a situation. Next theory is the comparative theory. This theory was given by David Ricardo in 1817. He tried to explain that even if a country has absolute advantage in the production of all the goods, such a country still derives benefits from international trade. According to him, there is a comparative advantage from trade of two or more products. Comparative advantage can be explained as there are differences in labor productivity. By taking a different example from the previous one of India and Bangladesh producing two products, that is radios and fans, where India has an absolute advantage in the production of both the products with underlying assumption that in both the countries 100 labor hours are consumed for producing both the products equally, which is half for radio and remaining half for the fans. And the production is based on constant cost. The figure depicting the production possibility frontiers and the table given below shows the situation where there is no trade between the countries. India produces 250 units of radios and 300 units of fans. It is very clear that India is having the absolute advantage over the production of both the products as it is more productive and efficient in the production of both the products. Even in this situation, India can take benefit by trading with Bangladesh. The figure depicting production possibility frontiers followed by the table shows that how both India and Bangladesh can reap benefit through trade even if one of them is having absolute advantage in the production of all the goods. Before trade, India was producing 250 units of radios and 300 units of fans with a total of 100 labor hours. India has absolute advantage over the production of Bangladesh as Bangladesh is able to produce only 50 units of radios and 250 units of fans with a total of 100 labor hours available. The figure depicting the production possibility curves and the table shows the case when both the nations agree for the increased production of radios, while the production of fans to remain the same as before the trade. In this situation, the overall production of fans of both the countries remain 550 units, as Bangladesh utilizes all the labor hours for producing 500 fans and India utilizes 8.33 labor hours for producing 50 units of it. India, however, utilizes remaining 91.67 labor hours for producing 458 radios. The gain resulting from this trade is evident as the overall production of radios has increased by 148 units while the overall production of fans remaining the same. The table shows the situation when both the countries are engaged in trade and agree for the increased production of fans. In this situation, the overall production of radios remains the same, which is 300 units, as India utilizes 60 labor hours to produce 300 units of radios and remaining 40 labor hours for producing 240 units of fans, while Bangladesh utilizes entire 100 labor hours for producing 500 units of fans. So here, trade leads to increased overall production of fans, while the overall production of radios being the same. Moving further, the next theory is the factor proportions theory. The factor proportions theory of trade was given by Elie Heschker and Bertil Ohlin. That's why it is known as the Heschker-Ohlin theory of trade. The theory states that the reason for a country to have a comparative advantage in the production of a good over the other is there is a difference in the factor endowments. Since factor endowments vary from country to country, different countries will have comparative advantage over different goods. According to this theory, different factor endowments lead to different factor cost and different goods require different types of factors for the production. Therefore, a country will have comparative advantage in the production of those products that use the resources or factors of production it has in abundance. There are many examples like that of Saudi Arabia, which is having abundant crude oil, US having abundant capital, India having abundant labor, and Australia having abundant land. This theory implies that countries should export those goods that make intensive use of factors of production that are locally available and are abundant, while they should import those goods that make intensive use of factors that are not available and locally scarce. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. International trade means sale, purchase, or exchange of goods and services that take place across national boundaries. International trade is needed as different nations have different capabilities and they are often most specialized in producing different things. Trade theory gives the reason for nations engaging in international trade and provide answers to questions like why do nations trade? What do they trade? Is trade a good thing? This theory starts with why different nations or countries trade and end by discussing the benefits to countries engaged in such trade. The theory of mercantilism refers to that a nation should encourage exports and restrain imports while accumulating wealth, gold and silver, as it was considered as a sign of strong nation. The theory of absolute advantage implies that a country should produce those goods in which it is more efficient than other countries and should import those goods which are available at low cost abroad. Further, there was a theory of comparative advantage which stated that a country can even reap benefits from trade if it is having absolute advantage in producing all the products. The last traditional theory is that of the factor proportion theory that states that different countries have different factors endowments and goods differ according to the types of factor endowments. Therefore, a country should export those goods that use factors that are locally abundant and produce those goods that make use of resources that are locally scarce. Thank you.